Why, hello there, old sports, and welcome to a Deltarune Chapter 5 video. I can't believe I'm making one of these, but here we are. Now, originally, this was going to be a video just kind of going over my thoughts on the chapter in general, but then I found something very, very interesting, and it kind of snowballed into this. And while I know I'm not the first person to come to this conclusion, and people were even coming to this conclusion before Chapter 5, I still would like to make a video going over my thoughts on this, because, I don't know, maybe I can give some interesting perspective, or maybe this might just be the first video you see going over this theory in YouTube video form. So enough dancing around the topic. I believe there is a chance, even if I don't necessarily think this is where the story will go, that Deltarune's weird route will end up being the canon route, or true route, or whatever you want to call it. Now, like I said, I don't necessarily think this will actually happen, nor do I think I even want it to happen. But again, I feel like I would be doing a disservice as a theorist if I were to just ignore it because I don't like the idea. Because honestly, I feel like that's a problem with game theorizing sometimes, is that people only want to stick with their ideas, and will throw away any ideas that don't fit with their own headcanon, but that's a whole nother story. Regardless, one of the first things people probably think of when I bring up something along the idea of the weird route being the canon way the game goes, people might bring up the idea that Deltarune plays a lot with the ideas of fate or prophecy, or just your choices not mattering because there's already a predetermined path set out for you. Many people have brought up the idea of the line, "Your choices do not matter in this world," being similar to Flowey's "It's kill or be killed" line from Undertale, in the sense where it's supposed to be this idea that gets thrown in your face at the beginning of the game that you will ultimately prove incorrect by the end. And while I used to agree with that idea, when Chapter 3 and 4 came out, so many of my expectations and predictions about this game were proven just completely false, and I think to some extent, I've not given up, but I've reassessed how I want to try to look at the future of this game, because so many things that we assumed were no-brainers were proven concretely false, like chess theory, for example. So I feel like there's an important level of just keeping an open mind that you need to keep with you. So that's why I'm bringing up this theory, even if I don't necessarily agree with it, because I just feel like exploring these ideas is one of the great things about this release format. And I feel like it's good to accept that we're not going to just be able to predict the end of the game, so we might as well just have fun coming up with what we can. So I guess my point here is that I could totally see Toby doing something similar to Undertale, where we're going to prove that line wrong by the end, but I could also see him doing the opposite. I could see it being a more dark, your choices don't matter, but we need to do what we can anyway. And I feel like that's kind of something that Flowery plays into, because he seems to know about the prophecy in a similar way that Ralsei does, and he even seems to know some of the meta elements of the world, yet he still fights regardless, even though he knows he loses. And I think that's very powerful, the idea that you're going to fight, regardless of if you think it's going to actually work or not, just because you believe that's the right thing to do. Flowey may have died in the end, but he died true to himself, and that's more than a lot of people can say. And then to tie this back into my main point, even if Undertale doesn't have a true ending, quote-unquote, it definitely has a correct ending, if you get what I mean. Because the whole game points you towards the true pacifist ending. All of the content we've gotten for Undertale post-release usually takes place post-pacifist. And the thing is that I feel like the pacifist route not only kind of fulfills the narrative themes of the game, but it also feels the most like a traditional ending. It even has the credits, or the full credits. While something like the genocide route almost seems like a New Game Plus in the sense of you weren't supposed to go this far. Lots of the ideas of Undertale revolve around, is a happy ending enough for you, or will you push this world to the limit just to get every drop of it you can? But as I just said, Deltarune is very much willing to follow a different path than Undertale, and even a different path to itself. So looking for patterns in Toby's previous work probably isn't going to help us completely find our answers, or it's not going to just give us a color by numbers sort of deal where it's all laid out for us and we can get the broad strokes. I feel like Toby has some very interesting stuff cooking for us, and we just need to be patient. But in the meantime, we can have some fun. So again, sorry it took me so long to finally get to this, I feel like the weird route has a good chance of being the true route of the game in a sense. And even if it doesn't narratively fulfill itself like the true pacifist route in Undertale, I could totally see this being some sort of bad ending deal where the good ending isn't the canon one, but the bad ending is, if that makes any sense. I'll elaborate more in a bit, but I just kind of want to set that idea up. But as of now, I'm sure you're tired of setup. We're 5 minutes into the video, and all I've done is just say the theory and why I feel like it isn't completely ridiculous. But I haven't actually backed it up with any evidence yet. So let's do that. Now usually I would give you a bunch of small pieces of evidence before finishing you with the wallop of my final piece of evidence, which I feel like is not only the strongest, but ties the whole thing together on its own. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to give you the big piece of evidence that I think is very strong, and if it turns out that evidence gets debunked, well, oopsie, I guess. Anyways, my big piece of evidence, the one thing this whole theory relies upon, is this motherfucker right, I mean this one. That one's also important, but this idiot's much more important for the current discussion. Now, back in Chapter 4, during the Hammer of Justice fight, Gerson mentioned a field of pink and gold, and an inferno of jealousy, causing lots of people to assume that Sans would be very important to the Dark World of Chapter 5, and while that was completely wrong, it turns out Sans was important to this chapter, just not in the way we thought. During the Chapter 5 festival, you can find Sans at one of 3 places, and this confirms that he still can teleport for whatever reason. But if you talk to him at his ice cream stand, after giving you ice cream, he will give you a punch card and ask you to write or draw your friends on it, so he can remember you, which that definitely doesn't have any context that makes it sound ominous. But Susie will end up drawing Chris, herself, Noelle, and then Ralsei. But that's 4 people, and on the card in his lab in Undertale, it's a poorly drawn picture of 3 smiling people, not 4. But on the weird route, one of the only one of the only required things you need to do before going to the beach where the drowning scene happens is talk to Sans at his ice cream shop. And what ends up happening is Susie draws her, Chris, and Ralsei on the card. She doesn't draw Noelle because she hasn't had a chance to get close to Noelle on the weird route because we keep pulling her away from her. But that means there's 3 people on the punch card that she gives to Sans. And that is a huge deal, because that lines up with what we see in the lab in Undertale. Now, even back in the days of Chapter 2, people were assuming that Sans was from Deltarune, or the Sans we see in Undertale is from Deltarune, and that only got strengthened in Chapters 4 when we get the Where It Rained sequence, because that obviously connects him to Undertale even more. But this is like the final nail in that coffin, but the thing is, it's like a new coffin that we didn't even know was being built in the background, because it implies that at the very least, Sans is probably from a Weird Route timeline. Now, I personally believe that there's still a good chance that Sans, or just the Weird Route, is canon in total, but I feel like that's where all the arrows are pointing right now, is that Sans is from a Weird Route timeline, where Susie only drew 3 people on that punch card instead of 4. Now, if you will allow me to get really conspiratorial for a second, when you game over in the Dark World, you're given a choice. Will you persist? You get a choice to continue or give up. When you give up, you get a message that says, "Then the world was covered in darkness." The screen goes black, and then a song called Darkness Falls plays. After that song ends, the game closes, at least on PC. I think on console it just takes you back to the chapter select menu. So that means, if Chris, and more importantly, the soul, does not persist upon defeat, or if the soul is destroyed, then that means the world will inevitably fall to darkness. The roaring will happen, and the world will end. So, in Chapter 5's Weird Route, since Chris and the soul go into the lake with Noelle, and seemingly into Chapter 7 land, or whatever's happening with that, that implies that Chris isn't there to stop any future dark fountains, and without Chris, and more importantly the soul, the fountains can't be sealed. Therefore, more darkness will continue to happen, or like more dark fountains will pop up, until eventually the roaring will happen and the world will fall to darkness. So, maybe in that chaos, Sans uses a mysterious device and gets jumped into a different timeline, taking a card with him to remember the world that he left. So, I don't know, that could happen. Again, just a mad ramble conspiracy theory, but it is somewhat substantiated by the evidence we have so far. Okay, coming back down to Earth for a second. Okay, maybe all the Sans stuff proves that at the very least, the weird route is plot relevant to some degree, because there were a lot of people that were predicting it would just be some sort of fuck you sort of deal, kind of like the genocide route, where it's like, well, we had a good thing going, and then you decided to come back and screw things up again, you dummy. But I feel like that's not what the weird route is going to be about this time around, at least compared to the genocide route in Undertale, which is usually what the weird route's compared to most of the time. So I guess to summarize, unlike the Undertale genocide route, which is very much more of a you dug too deep type of deal, the weird route in Deltarune seems at least relevant to some of the side characters in the current narrative, but that doesn't necessarily prove it is the true narrative for the main portion of the game. Now, what I'm going to bring up doesn't necessarily prove that either, but as I've been saying, I just want to get people thinking about things. And I feel like we can all agree that so far, the main idea behind Deltarune is to find something. Whether that be to find Des, or maybe if you're more of a meta player, to find Gaster. I believe the end goal of the game, beyond the prophecy of stopping the Angel's Heaven, is to find Des. And I feel like that may be on the weird route, that may be part of the normal route. I'm not sure yet, because obviously the game isn't done. But I feel like the prophecy is kind of like the false end goal, in the same way escaping the underground was the false end goal of Undertale. There's something more important than reaching the end, like Toby said on the Steam page, and I think that's finding Des. And after what we've learned in Chapter 5, I don't think Des can be the Knight, and honestly, I don't think any Lightner we've seen can be the Knight, because the Knight just acts so differently to any Lightner or Darkner, and we could see that even back in Chapters 3 and 4. But in Chapter 5, now that we know that the Knight was around when Des disappeared, I feel like it's kind of hard to say that Des or any Lightner we know of right now is the Knight. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Knight is some like third type of entity, whether it's like a darkness creature or a fucking demon, I don't know. And to be honest, so far the only thing in the game that I feel like actually has a good chance of only being Des is the voice in the code that is just kind of gets more lines each chapter. And the thing is, if that is Des, and our goal is to find Des, that means we're gonna have to do some meta game-breaking shit. And what is the weird route all about? Meta game-breaking shit. Which is, very concerning considering the ending of Chapter 5 on the weird route. But that's for future us to worry about. So I guess my point is that if our final goal does end up having to do something with being meta and game-breaking, the route that kind of sacrifices everything else for the sake of bending the game over its knee and breaking it in half might be more important in the end. I guess my point is that I feel like in the end, just like Undertale, the game will come down to some meta game-breaking stuff. But Deltarune has somehow become even more meta than Undertale in some ways, especially if the device theory is true, which it feels like it's only getting more and more solidified each chapter we get. So I guess I feel like if there's a route in the game that sacrifices the story, the characters, the plot, all for the sake of breaking the game and going deeper than you were supposed to, I feel like that is our way to find Des, or find Gaster, whatever. I feel like there's some deep stuff at the end of this route, and I feel like maybe we won't reach the end of the game as we're supposed to, so like the normal route, but I feel like if we do the weird route, we're going to get something else, even if we don't get an ending, quote-unquote. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't think the weird route is going to be some sort of secondary, you went too deep sort of deal like it was with the genocide route in Undertale, because I feel like the genocide route in Undertale is mostly there just to kind of flesh out the themes of the game, while I feel like the weird route might be there for that reason, but also for some other reasons. And I feel like the game wouldn't draw so much attention to itself in that way if it's trying to be kind of like a warning, because in Undertale, yes, the fight button was always there, but you kept getting rewarded for doing these things, and there wasn't really anything hinting at the genocide route, because yeah, there was the neutral route that you could stumble onto accidentally, but the genocide route was something you had to brute force into. You had to grind until the game literally let you no longer. But in the Deltarune, in Chapter 3, we basically have a mini tutorial on how to do the weird route for the Shadow Quest, or the Shadow Crystal Quest, and I feel like the thing there is that the Shadow Crystals are kind of meant to be something else important, but I feel like they wouldn't be hiding something that teaches you how to do the weird route if the weird route's meant to be this, like, forbidden accidental thing that you're supposed to kind of stumble in. Like, it feels too, it doesn't feel hidden enough like the genocide route. The genocide route felt like it was hidden from you, while the Snowgrave route, or weird route, sorry, feels like it's almost tempting you. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe we're not supposed to listen to it, we're following the pointed tail or whatever, but I'm just interested to see where this all goes. And hey, at the end of the day, if I'm wrong, no skin off my back. I'm not really too invested in this theory, and honestly, I don't think it's crazy enough to get me eternally mocked or, like, playfully teased in the same way something like Woody Theory would be. But if I am right, then I get to brag like there's no tomorrow. So it's a win-win for me, baby. Either I get to make people laugh at me, so they're happy, or I get to be right. So, I don't know. I see this as an absolute win. Anyway, that's pretty much the entire theory. This is kind of a quick video I wanted to get out because I've just been thinking about this when I haven't been listening to Flower Man and the Mew Mew theme on repeat over and over. And like I said, I don't really have too much. I don't know if this theory will be correct, and there's really a good chance it won't be, considering that because for a while, I know people have been considering this route the weird route, but technically within the code, it's also called Side B, and that was even kind of more put front and stage at the end of the route when you see the Enter Chapter 7 Side B thing at the end. So the thing is, there's a very good chance that, yes, this is the side route, this is the supplementary route, because most things that had an A and B side, the A side would be the main thing, and then B would be kind of supplementary. But who knows, maybe Toby is doing kind of a swap on that, but we'll see. Like I said, I don't think it's too healthy to get too invested in theories, because I think that's part of why some people were disappointed in Chapter 5, because they were expecting it to be something it was never going to be. And I feel like the downside of this sort of release structure is that people have so much time to build up expectations in their head, and even if what they get is really good, if it's not what you were expecting, it can still feel bad. Like, let's say you got the best steak ever at a restaurant, but you were expecting a salad. Even if this is like the best steak you've ever had, if you wanted a salad really badly, you're not going to be able to fully appreciate it. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I guess my point is that this theory, I feel like, is possible, but it also could not be possible. I just feel like don't get too hung up over a theory being right or wrong. I just think it's fun to explore ideas while we can before the game is done. With all that being said, I hope you have a good day. There should be more Deltarune videos coming soon. Thank you for spending some of your time with me today. It means the world to me. And like I said, more Deltarune videos coming soon. And I'll see you in the dark.